My name is James Barber. I'm part of the Izaak Walton Club, and I'm delighted to have Matt Martin with us from Smooth River Guiding. So, without any further ado, I'll pass it over to Matt, and we'll look forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you all for the invite and for the intro. It was awesome. Yeah, as was mentioned, a guide for a variety of species, but one of my major niches I find where I specifically where I live up in Midland with close proximity to Muskoka and Georgian Bay, Lake Simcoe, all that kind of stuff, is the underutilized warm water fly fishery that we have. Don't get me wrong, I love fishing our small creeks like the Credit for browns and brookies, but the season's getting shorter and shorter. So my goal is to really introduce people to these species that aren't as often talked about or fished for, to help not only alleviate pressure on some of our cold water fisheries, but show people what else is out there and how much fun you can have picking up a 10 weight and chasing some of these big fish. They're not just for conventional rods. Flies often work better for pike, if you can believe it or not. So what type of lake are you fishing? When I'm thinking about pike, when I'm scouting new lakes, if someone was new getting into the sport, you'd want to look at the topography of the lake and what category it falls into. So lakes are broken into 3 different categories. First one is oligotrophic. So think about your classic lake trout lake, something in the middle of Algonquin Park, or further north where they're granite. They're not full of life on the shorelines. You're not seeing a ton of bait fish or specifically bugs, and they're always cold. Now, there are portions of lakes that can be oligotrophic. They often have low sediment, low basis to the food chain. Those lakes can actually provide, large fish, but low numbers, I find. There's less food chain to support a large fishery of small to average fish. So the few pike that are in there, they can get quite large by feeding on bait fish that thrive in those environments, like ciscos, whitefish, and suckers. You might not find as many, but your quality is going to be up there. Your next lake you're going to find is a mesotrophic lake. This would be kind of the middle range. Let's think of like Lake Simcoe, for instance. It can be deep and shallow mix. It often has warmer water temperatures, and it definitely has a lot of sediment with insect life. Sediment seems to attract insects like mayflies for the most part. Think of the Hexagena hatch you see on Lake Simcoe or Georgian Bay every June. It's absolutely massive. And those are big bugs, and they all come out of the sand, burrowing mayflies. So the basis of the food chain is quite strong. What that allows for is a lot of panfish and other smaller fish species to thrive and survive. The cool thing about mesotrophic lakes is they can provide a fishery that has a large population of fish, but also has enough colder areas in the lake to support the larger quality fish as well. Pike are not particularly a warm water fish. They need some buffer. They like the water temps a little bit cooler, especially if they're large. They need to get out deep. And then finally, eutrophic lakes would be, that city pond that you've seen. Think of all the ponds, waterways in High Park, for example, full of cattails, invasive species like milfoil, and it's just almost choked with weeds. Now, they're extremely rich in biodiversity of plant life, generally speaking, and bug life, but they're so choked full of weeds that often large fish or fish don't often get as large, excluding species like maybe carp and largemouth bass. Pike, on the other hand, need some room to grow. They need room to get out deep and stay cool. These lakes often have massive algae blooms in the summer, which kill off a lot of the small bait fish by removing a lot of the oxygen out of the water. So the food chain can be hard hit. But species like largemouth, which also that also rely highly on terrestrial food, like insects, mice, frogs, they thrive because the food's always coming in. So make sure you're looking what kind of lake you're fishing for. And if you're looking for a lake that if your cottage lake seems to be really weedy and shallow and warm, you're probably going to experience lakes with lots of numbers of pike potentially, but maybe they're topping out in the 30-inch range. On the other end of the spectrum, when you're in those cold oligotrophic lakes, you're going to work hard for your fish, but most of the fish you're going to find are going to be fairly large. And you're gonna find the biggest pike possible in those cold lakes. So, a little bit of life history. Pike are fairly well known within the conventional world of fishing. They're a very popular species, but I find in the fly world, a lot of people are confused and they don't even realize you could target them on fly. So I want to kind of break down when we're fishing for them and basically the spring season, how they progress.
Matt, is this your father?
Yeah, that is, yeah. Look like me?
Yeah.
That's a good thing. Yeah, no, he's this was a trip specifically. This one was on Lake Nipigon. That was a wonderful trip. But yeah, he's a deadly angler. Taught me everything I know, I think. And now I'm teaching him things about it. So pike themselves, they are a spring spawning fish. There's two areas of activity for pike, or main times of year when you should be targeting them in the shallow water, and that's the spring and the fall. Water temps are very important to a northern pike. I mentioned earlier that they are not really a warm water fish, more of a cool water fish. So if you're seeing temps get into the 60s degree Fahrenheit, 65 degree Fahrenheit range, you're starting to get to that line where they're going to start moving out deep. So in the spring, they start spawning generally between March and May. That's usually found right at ice out. Pike often start exhibiting signs of spawning below the ice. One of very few species that do, actually. And obviously between March and May, that just depends on how far north you are. When I was on this trip up on Lake Nipigon, for instance, ice out is often the third week of May to maybe the first week of June. So it varies. But down here, pike season opens May 1st, and there's well finished spawning by that point. So with the early spawn, it gets them, puts them well ahead of competition. So specifically species like muskie, pike spawn well earlier, and that allows their young to grow quite large quickly and start predating on other fish that are spawning in June, late May through late June, like bass and pike, or bass and muskie, and carp even. So pike have always been kind of deemed a little bit of the devilfish because they can take over lakes quite quickly if they're left unchecked, or if there's no other predators in the lake to predate on them. You'll find generally speaking, you'll find a lot of small pike in a lot of lakes. Finding them with those bigger fish can be quite hard. They spawn, they're interesting to watch spawning. They are what they call broadcast spawners. So they will group up in these massive groups of like 4, 5, 6 fish in one small group, but within a larger group of 30 or 40 fish in a bay. And you will see a big female that's generally 36 inches or bigger with 3, 4 males swimming right along her side. If you think of when you've watched steelhead in the spring spawning in the creeks, there'll be that often the female, and there'll be one male kind of with her protecting, and then there'll be 2 or 3 will shoot in right at the last moment. Well, pike kind of get along a bit more, and they'll all swim together. And unlike steelhead or bass or any panfish species, they don't dig nests or redds. They find new emergent weed growth, or if there isn't any, old weed growth from the previous year, and the female will dump her eggs as the males dump their sperm into the lake, and the eggs are quite sticky, and they'll stick to that new weeds and grow and hatch relatively quickly. The females often hang around for only a short period of time after. They maybe a few days to a week recovering, feeding. And the males will hang out a little longer. The males often seem to stay up shallow well past spawn. And we know they're males, generally speaking, because they're 30 inches range or less. They don't often get too much bigger than that. And a big important part of this is they don't guard their eggs. So a female pike has thousands and thousands of eggs, and they spawn all over the course of a bay with many different partners. And that is what provides their success. Right when a heron finds a group of eggs on that group of weeds, there's many more eggs spread throughout the bay to allow these fish to continue to survive. And because they spawn up shallow and those eggs hatch early, the next fish that come up and spawn shallow would be like your panfish species, like perch and bluegill. And when the pike are only half an inch to an inch long, they're getting eaten like crazy by those panfish. It's just funny that a few years later the tables turn, and the panfish are the number one on the diet. And then other cool thing about pike, and often not talked about within the fly fishing community, is they do make great table fare. So keeping pike is not a bad thing, especially keeping fish that are in that 30-inch range. I'm not saying go out and keep a 45-inch pike, those big females, but if you'd like fish fry, pike are right up there with any other fish on the market. So once the spawn completes, you're going to find the fish often in quite a rough appearance. There'll be wounds on their side. They'll have bite marks. The spawn is pretty rough on them. Those males are fighting each other. Big females are pushing away smaller males. And if you've ever had the pleasure of catching a pike or a muskie and looked in their mouth, their business end is loaded with teeth. So even just a gentle nudge or a nip seems to open up some pretty good wounds on their side. So often they are in full recovery mode. They're going to move out into like 6 feet of water, 7 feet of water, and really start feeding. Often you'll be catching these fish and you'll be looking down their throat and seeing tails of other fish still sticking out of their mouth, and they're still taking a 6 to 8 inch fly. They're just so hungry this time of year. A little bit on the maturity side, they grow quick. So unlike other fish, they're ready to spawn very early in life. So 4 to 5 years for a male pike, they're up there spawning, and 5 to 6 for a female pike. What's quite interesting about Izaak species is they grow really, really quick in the first 5 years. Depending on who you read and listen to, they will say they're anywhere from like 28 to 35 inches in the first 5 to 6 years. However, after that, they can slow down to a ½ inch per year growth or less. There's tagged fish that over the course of 10 years have only grown like 3 inches. So, pike that can live into their 20, 25 years, they might not be that much longer than they were when they were like 10 years old. It's pretty incredible, actually. Where do you start? Lakes are big, and you hit a river, you're always, let's think about when you're fishing the upper credit, you're always within 20 to 30 feet of that next brown trout, right? The river's only so wide. Doesn't mean you're going to catch it. I know that for sure. But they're somewhere close by. With lakes, they can be massive. So when I think of Georgian Bay, when I guide out there, it's 1.5 million acres, right? So sometimes you feel like it's a bit of a shot in the dark, especially when you're learning. But you can really narrow it down quickly in the early season. The great thing about pike is they're creatures of habit, and every single pike in the first couple weeks of May are going to be where you can find the warmest water. So if the main lake, it's often in May, it's usually 39 to 42, 43 degrees when I'm shooting across Severn Sound. When you get into these back bays, you're going to find temps in the mid 50s to high 50s. So that's a large temperature jump, 20 degrees, roughly. So what that does is basically take all of the pike that are somewhat active and pile them in the bays. I like to start my search at the mouths of bays. So if we're looking in the top right photo there, number 2, for instance, these are corresponding roughly images. One's topographical, one's just Google or aerial photo. You'll see like the point where it says number 3 on the bottom right, it's 5-6 feet of water. I'm going to start there every day, and I'm going to start working those contour lines back and forth across the bay from right to left and then back left to right, and working my way in about a cast distance each time. In fact, when you make a cast and you move a fish, often you see a big wake coming for your fly. It's kind of like a submarine coming at your fly. They're going to move out to number 2. We're starting to look at 4 to 5 feet. That's generally my second week of the season, and so on and so forth as I go through for the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season. What is quite interesting sometimes is you're going to see water temps in late May when pike is open in Muskoka, and the surface temp can be like 75 degrees, and you're like, what the heck? This is so warm all of a sudden. What's going on? However, you're still seeing pike in the shallows. It's so confusing. But I'll tell you, if you drop one of your river thermometers down 4 or 5 feet and get a temp off the bottom versus the surface, it's huge. Major difference. It generally happens when we're not having wind. You get like 3 or 4 days of just calm conditions. That surface temp can throw a lot of people off, and they're just fishing the wrong spots. They're thinking, okay, the water temp 75, I need to go out to 15 feet to find these fish, when in fact, no, they're still up shallow. Great thing about pike is if the water's clear, they're big. They're quite easy to see. So a few other things I'm looking for is green weeds. That's huge. If you can find standing live weeds in water that is varied from 6 to or 2 to 10 feet of water, you're on the right path. I don't want them to be dense. A lot of people fish weed beds that are just way too thick for pike to move around in. And if you're fishing thick weed beds, you're generally going to find smaller pike or spawning bass. That's one thing we try to avoid this time of year. If you find weeds that are spaced out, 6 to 10 feet away from each other, those weeds, are generally cabbage. It's like a broad-leafed greeny weed with a long stem almost all the way to the surface, and they almost have like a little cocoon on the tip of the weed that's floating on the surface. Those are what you're looking for. Those pike can stay down in the bottom, camouflaged in, but yet with one kick of their tail can attack or pivot and chase bait fish easily without crashing into weeds. So here's a little photo of my friend Nick. Don't be afraid to get up there. Often we get out of the boat and we'll wade when the fish are extremely spooky. How do we know they're spooky? Well, you're using your boat with your trolling motor on low and you're seeing like dust clouds on the bottom, like something was dropped on the bottom, or like you took a step and there was dust. That's the pike that you've spooked. So if you're seeing those, we often pull the boat over, put the waders on, jump out, and start walking for them. And I'll tell you, it's addicting but incredibly scary the first time you hook a 40-inch pike and you're up to your waist with them and you're in waders and you're like trying to hand land them, but it's a good way to get them, and it's fun to be a little bit scared. So coming down to forage, it's going to start out with a lot of smaller fish, but most importantly the white sucker. This fish is in pretty much every lake, and I shouldn't say white sucker. There's a whole bunch of different sucker species out there, but the suckers are high on the food chain. They spawn early this spring. Anybody that's done any trout fishing or steelhead fishing and thought they hooked a nice fish and be disappointed by a bugle-nosed trout will know that what time of year they spawn. So it's the same time of year the pike just wrap up their spawning pretty much. So when pike are looking and hungry, these things are abundant. Now, they're not looking for the 18 to 22 inch suckers that you see when you're fishing the lower credit. They're looking more for those 6 to 8 inch ones they can hit easy, swallow in one go, and are quite plentiful. Lots of small male suckers, but it's not just bait fish. One of the most important forage basis in any lake in the spring would be the leeches. It's something that a lot of people don't think of for pike, but they're such an easy meal and they can't swim fast. They're up in the shallows where those pike are sunbathing. And some days you're throwing these big bait fish patterns and you're just watching fish follow them and ignore them. But if you throw on a 4-inch bunny leech, they just turn on. It's the strangest thing. You could throw that fly with a 6-weight. It's crazy. Besides leeches, we also briefly talked about it, but it's different species of panfish, but most importantly, yellow perch. If there's suckers around, they do seem to prefer them versus the spiny rayed fish like sunfish and pumpkin seed and yellow perch or smallmouth. They prefer soft rayed fish, it seems. However, if you've ever caught a walleye and you're bringing that up to the boat and had a pike hit it halfway to the boat, you obviously know what I'm talking about. They aren't afraid of eating spiny rayed fish, sometimes half their size. It even happens with pike, so a lot of my pike patterns are tied with pike colors in mind. They're voracious. They'll eat a lot of different things. But if you focus, a fly that's drab and tan and white for your sucker, some black leech patterns, and something that's a little bit more bright, like a fire tiger pattern or a natural perch color, you're probably covering the basis for the spring. You can see that fire tiger craft bird deceiver there. It's something about the size that I would fish for spring fish. So when it comes to gear, this is one that does have quite a bit of specialized gear. So your traditional 9-foot rod is going to be the way to go for accuracy and power. A little bit on the heavier side though, an 8 to 11 weight is perfect. An 8 weight will handle flies, regularly up to 6 to 7 inches, depending on how heavily weighted they are. I'll put it this way though, every pike that I've ever caught, and if you know how to fish, can be caught on an 8 weight. You bend that rod to the cork, it can happen. So don't think you're undergunned because you don't have a 10 weight. An 8 weight will do just fine. It just might not cast very well, especially with some of the air resistant flies. You want a reel, but something that's just really there to balance the outfit. It doesn't have to have an incredible drag. It's good to have one, but every pike you're going to catch, you're going to strip them in. I don't put them on the reel. If you're spending time putting the fish on the reel, that's when you're going to lose them. It's better to just keep stripping. Keep them tight, keep that rod bent and loaded, and pull on the fish. Don't lift the fish. That's one thing. If anyone heard that term before, pull on them, don't lift? It's generally used in tarpon fishing. You don't want to lift with it, your rod up in the air and put a big C in your rod. You want to kind of lean back and pull that rod towards you, and that'll help move the larger fish.
Now remember, your fly rod has got 3 basic sections. Your tip bends for short distance casting. The midsection may want to bust out a longer cast, and the butt of this rod is for fighting fish. Watch how, when I think I'm pulling hard and doubling that rod, that 12 pounds of sand does not move. And I can lean back, and you see people pulling like this, and they get the rod bent, and they think that they're kicking some ass, but no, nothing. All you're doing is bending your rod. Now, that's 12 pounds of sand. I can lift that with a pretty decent bend in my rod. You'll see here, okay? But look at my arms. I can't hold it for very long because I am not physically strong enough to hold 12 pounds of resistance. So the most important thing when you're fighting big fish is use the butt section of the rod. You straighten your rod, you straighten your arms, because now I'm anatomically stronger with my bones in line and my muscles in line. And now when I bend the rod here, I've got a lot of resistance on that fish, and watch, I can lift with my legs. And now you can see how easy that is. I can almost lift that with one hand. You see that? That's basically because I'm using this part of the rod.
Perfect.
And then you want to change angles when you're fighting them too. You don't want to just keep pulling them around in one direction. If they're going to the right, you're going to try to lead them for a second. And if you just keep going that way, though, they're never going to get tired. So slow rotations to the left, change their angle, make them swim the other way, gets them in the boat quick. Nowadays, there's so many different pike and muskie fly lines. When I started doing this, we were just using our standard weight forward fly lines, maybe a bass taper. But now companies like Rio or Scientific Anglers, they're making like muskie specific lines, which are great for pike. In different sink rates. Get yourself if you had to buy one, everyone's going to say get a floating. I don't agree with that. I think a type 3 fly line, or maybe an intermediate, is your most versatile fly line. For pike, Scientific Anglers with their forget the name of the Titan, I think it's called the Titan Sink 3 or Sink 5. They're graduated, so like the running line is an intermediate, the back tapers a type 3, and the front taper or the head is a type 5. So you get a really direct line to the fish. There's no sharp angles in your line. Very great, like fantastic line, great strip sets, casts easy, gets the fly down. And sinking lines are important because we're generally using unweighted flies. Weighted flies cast clunky. But if you have an unweighted fly and a weighted line, it's much easier to cast. And you get a better presentation. The fly can hover in a fish's face instead of nose diving. And to go off topic a little bit, that is what makes flies, I find, a little bit more effective than a lot of conventional tactics when I have one fly angler and one gear angler in the boat. Flies can move while sitting still, if that makes sense. A feather can twitch, a piece of bucktail can just move, or a single piece of flash can just wave in their face. And on a neutral or negative fish, that can just make the most aggressive strikes. Some of the other things I'm thinking about, let me click through these a little bit, is short leaders. Don't go tying 9-foot leaders. Keep your leaders to around 3 to 4 feet. My leader formula is really simple. It's 2 feet of 40-pound test nylon, 1 foot of 30-pound test nylon, and 1 foot of bite wire. The reason I use a 30-pound section is my pike lines have a 50-pound or 40-pound break. The fly lines are 40-pound test. So if I'm using a 40-pound butt section, I don't want to snag up and be breaking fly lines. Fly lines have not gotten any cheaper over the years. They're, these lines I'm talking about, it's crazy. They're now like $150. It's kind of wild. So you don't want to be breaking lines. You want a purpose-built break section. Now, 30-pound test is not easy to break. You can pull on any size fish as hard as you want. You're not going to break it. But if you do get hung up on a rock or a log that you can't retrieve the fly, A lot of the time I grab a leather glove in my boat, or I will wrap it around a cleat on my boat and slowly drive away until it breaks. And then you just lose your fly and your tippet. It's not a big deal. But short leaders are key because you're using sinking lines. You want that line to do the work, not the weight of the fly. Some tools that are very specific to pike and muskie would be long-handled pliers, not your multi-tool, not a pair of normal forceps you would use for trout. Some of these pike, even a 32-incher that takes a fly deep, which most pike do take flies deep, they got a long head. That head might be 8 inches long. So trying to get down there with a small pair of forceps, it's not easy. So lots of options out there, whether they're those loon ones or you go to Canadian Tire and buy a Mastercraft brand. It's the same thing. A stripping basket or stripping mat can work really well, especially specifically in a boat or if you're wading in a weedy environment to help control your line a little bit. Jaw spreaders are something I don't leave home without. In fact, I have 2, maybe 3 pairs of them in the boat at all times, because you put those in a fish's mouth and they shake their head and see you later. They're gone. I often will tie a piece of foam pool noodle to them to help get them back after, so that they don't sink to the bottom. But I have donated a lot of pliers and jaw spreaders to the lake over the years, fishing for pike and muskie. Other than that, you need an oversized net, and that's something that can't really be stressed enough. I don't want a net that's just big enough. I want a bag on the net that when I put the net on the gunnel of the boat, that fish is still comfortably in the water. Big pike are big babies. I don't know what it is, but like a small pike that you hook, accidentally you hook deep and you're taking the hook out and it gets some blood going. The fish is like, they seem to just take off like a rocket. You fish in those bays, you never see them come up. You catch small pike with gill damage because someone else caught them. But you look at a large, big female pike the wrong way, and I swear she turns belly up. So having a big net that allows them to breathe and keep fish wet as long as possible is very important. When it comes to flies, we'll get to them, but don't go overboard. Have a few different patterns, but in a variety of colors, and that'll get you started. And most importantly, pike have teeth. We talked about this. Wire bite is very important. Lots of options on the market now. This is the real wire bite. It doesn't really matter who you use. The traditional stainless steel coated with nylon wire bite works pretty well. It's kind of been the standard, tied on to a knot called a jam knot, or use a mustad quick attach, which is something, it's like a quick little half turn to put your fly on, really like a snap swivel kind of, but a little easier. It works okay. However, I've switched to titanium leaders personally this fall, and I'm going to rock them into next summer as well, or spring, because one leader with a quick attach on it can last you like 100 pike, no problem. The wire bite gets all coily after a couple hours of casting or one fish, and you find you're burning through it. Just a lot more knots. So the nickel titanium wire is really cool to look for, and Scientific Anglers makes a great one, and that's generally in the 25 to 35 pound range that I'm looking for. If I was muskie fishing, I would up that to 55 pound, not because the fish are average bigger, but the flies are a little bit more labor intensive, and I don't want to be burning through muskie flies. All right, so another shot of some of the areas we fish. These weeds beds are, 1.5 feet, 2 feet deep. You'll notice myself there. I'm just scanning. I'm kind of just looking for nervous water, looking for weeds to move, looking for fins, and ready to take a shot if one presents itself. Talk a little bit of how to approach these fish. Everyone thinks of a lot of warm water fish as kind of dumb and easy to catch, but there's some things you can do to stack those odds in your favor. So if you choose to get out of your boat, just try to walk softly. Think of it like you're brown trout fishing, honestly. Now there's no real current to worry about going upstream or downstream, but be conscious of the dust clouds you kick up. Don't go in a circle and expect to find a fish right where you were standing before. Have a end point in mind and work your way towards that. Try to approach the fish with the sun at your back. You're going to have a lot more vision. It's comes straight from like flats fishing for bonefish. If you're poling with the sun in your face, good luck seeing anything. You want to have the sun at your back to highlight the fish and their sides. And walk slowly. Take a couple steps, look left to right. Take a couple steps, look left to right. If you're using the boat, like a lot of my time is spent, and if you have, the electric trolling motor on the front, try not to run it in pulses, like on off and on off. Just put it on a low speed, let that hum become almost normal for the fish. Setting 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10, just work your way slowly through the water looking for fish, or just fan casting and covering water. Um, One thing that I don't have on there that I've noticed, when fish get extremely spooky in these shallows, and I'm in my boat, I'll actually turn off my electronic, like fish finders, depth finder, whatever, um, because that ticking from your transducer seems to make a huge difference in their aggression levels. If they're neutral or negative, and you're just seeing them lazily follow your fly, if you go back through with your, if I unplug the transducer from my Humminbird, uh, the fish seem to be a little more willing to eat, and it's not something that, like, I didn't find that on my own. That's something a lot of people have been talking about for years, especially with today's transducers. They're incredibly powerful. And I've tested just by jumping and swimming under my boat in the summer, and the ping and the ticking that you hear is quite annoying. And I can imagine for a fish, especially ones that are pressured, they may get used to that and be like, huh, every time I hear that, I get pulled into a boat. So it's kind of a good little hack. Talked about this already. Start at the outside of the bay and work your way in the back. Identify areas of cover which would potentially allow ambush points for these fish. Pike or lion weight predators, very rarely are they cruising and looking for food. Even in deep water, they're going to set up next to a rock and they're going to wait for a Cisco to swim by. So here, look for like logs, areas like points in weed cover, like this grass in the background. You can see there's little points that stick out with denser grass. Try to fish parallel to those, like bring your fly along the weed edge as long as you can versus into it and out of it. You just get more presentations at more fish. If you see a fish, very important that you don't line your fish or hit it on the head with your fly. A small fly is 6 inches long. That's a pretty loud splat in the water. And sometimes, there's fish on all ends of the gene pool. But from my experiences, bait fish don't generally fall from the sky. And pike will spook from that. They're usually avoiding birds at that point. So cast in front of and well beyond the fish. So cast 3-4 feet in front of the fish, cast 10-15 feet past it, and creep that fly into view. Don't surprise the fish with your fly. Bring it into view. Give it time to move, read its body language. Pike are very almost like charismatic. You're going to watch them for long enough and you're going to see fins twitch when they get excited, and watch what happens with their dorsal fin as it'll adjust the angle before the fish kicks off, because that's how they do all their steering. So the dorsal fin will twitch and rotate, and then the whole fish is basically a tail. So one full kick, that fish can close 10 feet like it's nothing. When you're selecting flies, build flies that have the water pushing abilities, but also some flow. That means mixing in craft fur with bucktail, for instance, something that can, with a big bulky head, push some vibration forward. But when that fly is sitting still for that 1 or 2 seconds between strips, it can just shimmy a little bit, make a little bit of a sign of life, and get an attack. And then when it comes to your stripping technique and retrieving the fly, always start off slow. Especially in cold water, I think of it as like a 2-foot strip to a pause. So if I've got the rod in my right hand, I'm stripping with my left, I'm going to grab the line at my finger and I'm going to strip that with a full elbow extension to my waist or to my hip. So it's about 1.5 feet, 18 inches, 20 inches. And I'm going to let it pause for like a 1 or 2 second count. And then I'm going to do it again and do it again. A lot of the flies I use actually have some sort of side to side movement built in. As the water warms up, a little bit more stuttery jerks using your rod tip to impart some action and speed it up, even to the point of like a roly-poly retrieve that you've probably seen in stillwater trout, tucking the rod under your armpit and a nice 2-handed retrieve to get that fly swimming. And I mentioned before, you're always looking for those dust clouds. If fish, spook off, they don't usually go far, but it's just telling you to slow down. Just whether you're in your boat or waiting, just slow down your approach. Maybe if you're in a boat, stand on a cooler, get a little bit more vision. Try to, if you're spooking them at 30 feet away, maybe stand up another 2 feet on a cooler, and that'll give you an extra 10 feet, and you might see them before you spook them. So, and big fish, they love it. They love up shallow. That's a big pre-spawn fish. Just a healthy one, or one that skipped spawning. Maybe they don't spawn every year. So just a big female though. So first thing I always have to have in my box is small synthetic bait fish flies. So whether those are like these, like EP minnow type design flies, they're easy to cast. They're pretty durable, to be honest. They're non-invasive. A lot of fish will eat those. Then Murdich minnow. Everyone's probably heard about the Murdich minnow for smallmouth. Tie it with like an EP fiber head, like actually spun and then clipped instead of Estaz. And you can bulk that up. Like that one's on a size 4.0 hook and about 8 inches long. Lots of side to side movement. Very, very good fly. The yard sail, I talked about this one briefly. I actually did a tie along or a video on Drift's YouTube page if you ever want to go see how I tie this fly. It's extremely effective. It has become, I would say, my go-to. In fact, most days, like we're starting with 1 or 2 of them on people's lines. So they're just that good. They are basically like kind of like a deceiver platform with the schlappen tail. But then the head is all, it could be any synthetic fiber, but most of the time EP fiber or slinky, I think it's called slinky fiber. However, in each little stack of EP fiber that I put on there, I then wrap a piece of closed cell foam, like a maybe a 1/2 inch semicircular tab that I'm tying onto the top of the hook shank to make a suspending fly. So when you strip this fly on a sinking line and pause it, that fly doesn't sink, it doesn't float, it just sits right where it is. So for slow or neutral fish, this thing just crushes them. And to be honest, if you tie them in white and orange, white and chartreuse, you're probably good. Like white seems to be really important with pike. They almost always attack from the bottom, and every fish has a white belly. So you're probably good with a lot of white in your flies. The next one I briefly talked about, it would be a bunny leech. Now that might not be the traditional bunny leech you're used to seeing with rabbit strip tail and a palmered rabbit strip for the rest of it. While I do use those, they like to foul a lot. And if you're not checking your fly every couple casts, your fly is going to get all wonky. So a lot of the time what I'll do is I'll just replace the bunny material that's palmered just with like a spun bunch of bucktail that just extends past the hook a little bit. That's a 2/0 hook. So the fly is maybe 6 inches long in total. That bucktail stops the tail, the bunny tail, the rabbit tail from spinning around the hook. That helps a lot. You can also add mono loops and all that, but this is just super simple and it works well for me. And then, larger flies, like that's a 9-inch, like double deceiver, just tied out of craft fur and bucktail. A little bit more intrusive, very bright. Vertical barring seems to be really important on a lot of pike flies. I think that's, pike and smallmouth both have those bars to a degree. Walleye sometimes do. Small young of the year pike have like bars, like vertical bars a little bit with their spot patterns versus, the lateral spots. So it seems to be, a contrast what they really engage on. And Mauro, you mentioned eyes. Eyes are so important for me. I think they create that target for these fish to the point that in one of my fly boxes, I always have a bottle of the Gorilla gel glue or the Loctite gel glue actually, and a package of eyes, and I'm replacing them if I need to throughout the day. They're so important. They work so much better with an eye. Number 6 is a fly that used to be my favorite fly for pike, called El Diablo. It's a lot of bucktail, a lot of EP fiber, a little bit of marabou, some schlappen, lots of flash. But it's a spun dubbing loop of EP fiber, and then you shave the sides. So whether that's with scissors or I have an old hair trimmer that I use, I just clip those sides down. And makes a flat profile really well. And because that EP fiber is so long, it almost covers the hook gap. You actually have a really good, almost weedless fly. In fact, you can tie the head a little long, and EP fiber is soft enough that it'll stiff enough to keep a lot of the weeds off. But when a fish strikes, it's almost like a Texas rigged, worm kind of for bass. Like you set that hook and the material folds out of the way and the fish gets the hook. Really good pattern. And then another one of Matt Krajewski's patterns called the slip and slide. It's another very bulky bucktail fly with a lot of synthetic tail, bulky tail, lots of flash. That's in the lemonhead colorway. It's just really high contrast, really wide, almost like a glide bait. That fly, if you tie it with a snap or a fast hatch clip, that fly will move 9-10 inches on each strip left to right. It's a very wandering fly and incredibly durable. I think the one there was new when I took a photo of it, but last spring it caught over 100 fish and it's still fishing. Like it's still in my fly box. So it's good for next spring. Then the famous, we're starting to get into musky flies a little bit, like the Bufords. I tie one that's almost all craft fur instead of bucktail. There's a little bit of bucktail in there for prop, but the head is craft fur. And if you look at the next one, which is the actual bucktail Buford, the head shape is completely different. So the head is folded back into more of a cone versus a flat face. So the wobble is not as intense as the wobble you find with the bucktail that's spun and clipped into like almost a popper like shape. It can really light them up when they're looking for an aggressive take, but like not as aggressive as the Buford, as the bucktail Buford. I should mention almost all of these, my go-to is a 4/0 front hook for pike flies. I will downsize accordingly with like leech flies and stuff down to like a size 1, but most of them I'm starting with like a 3 to 4/0. That's kind of my go-to. Bucktail Deceiver, great simple fly. That one's veiled with a little bit of craft fur on the head, black and purple. Not as often color you'd see for pike, but really good on dark days. Just all bucktail and flash. That's a traditional bucktail Deceiver, really simple. But I veil it with craft fur a little bit for extra movement. And we're getting there. Game changers, I'm still not great at tying them. They work though. They take a long time to tie by the time you spin up brushes and all that kind of stuff and clip them. They swim great. Some days it's all they want. Other days they have no interest in them. But good thing to have in your box, at least having one or two. Here's one that was these. I actually have this on here twice because it was 2 color patterns that worked so well last year. This one that was kind of an olive over white with a little orange, really cleaned up, and it's nothing but Icelandic sheep hair and some longer neck hackles. So if you get a nice, dry fly neck or cape, those ones off the top that are like size 6 or size 4 that you might never use, they make great pike material. They're really stiff and they're going to create good lateral line. So kind of like a perchy color. Now Icelandic sheep fur or wool does cast like a wet sock. I'm not going to lie. It holds a lot of water, but it's got a ton of movement and it's super durable. So as long as you're okay with opening your loops up, and we'll talk about that through here, it's pretty good. And then the fly would be the Whistler, just like a leech fly, small. Someone mentioned poppers. Poppers are always on there. This is an articulated popper with like I think it's a 60 mil shank up front and then a 4/0 hook off the back. And the hook's actually separate to the entire fly. So I can cut the hook and it's attached with a split ring. So if I have to cut the hook to save a fish, I can do that and just put a new hook on and save my fly. Really good. Kind of tied off of the Nicholas Bauer from Sweden, his design on poppers. If you want someone that knows pike flies, he's someone to look at. And then again, the same flies above that, but in like a really yellow and olive colorway. That worked extremely well. And hidden on the bend of the hook is about 20 wraps of 0.25 lead wire to allow it to kick. And when you strip, it almost always will strip forward and then the tail will drop and the nose will come up and it'll create this like stall, like a really aggressive stop. And most of the fish you catch are going to be on the pause while pike fishing. It's not when you're stripping in actively. It's every time you stop, you're going to get hit. Eventually, though, they're all going to look like that. So don't put too much care and effort into them. So casting big flies, open up your loops. Well, you hear that term all the time. What does that mean? Try to don't cast in as straight of a line as you would when you're watching a nice brown trout rise upstream of you. Kind of come back on a low angle off your shoulder and then over your head. If you've heard the term Belgian casting, very common in Euro nymphing, similar process, just to keep that fly away from your rod tip. They're big flies. You don't want to break your rod. Water loading is a good option if you're struggling to get the fly out there. That fly hits the water, similar to like a spay cast, you're going to pull forward with a slight haul and you can shoot really far with just one forward cast. It's actually incredible. Keep in mind wind direction. Don't be casting off your windward shoulder. You're going to get hooked like my buddy Nick here. Wrap around your rod. Hauling, learn to haul. That's a big thing. Double haul is your best friend. When I take guests out pike fishing, I try to, I don't want to vet my guests because I'm happy taking out complete beginners. If any of you have fished with me, I love beginner anglers. It's lower expectations through the day. It makes for an easy guide day. But having at least had some practice learning to double haul, and that can be a bit of a challenge. Like it's patting your head and rubbing your stomach. Both hands are doing something different at the same time. And if you don't know how to do it, Take some time first off, at least try it, maybe get a casting lesson, go to a fly shop, talk to them, talk to a friend that can do it, try to see if you can figure it out, watch YouTube videos. There's a lot of great videos out there that break it down, but also don't just say you know how to, because it'll set you up for failure throughout the day. There's plenty of times when people tell me they don't know how to do it. One of the boat launches I use is right next to a baseball diamond. We'll go spend the first 30 minutes like getting you a little bit dialed with the double haul, being able to like at least give you the process, and then throughout the day improve. The reason I say that is you don't want to be casting 5-6 times to cast these flies. You're going to kill your shoulder. When you get good at it and you're experienced with it, one back cast with a haul and a forward cast with a haul, you can shoot whatever lines at your feet, especially with these heavy lines. So take some time with that, and just be honest with yourself or your guide. Like, I don't know how to double haul. Perfect. I'll bring you in closer to the targets. I want people by the end of the day to at least be casting 40 feet, 50 feet or more is ideal, just because you cover more water. But 40 feet by the end of the day would mean, I felt successful. And then pinch your barbs, not only for fish's health, but your health. Talked a little bit about this, but you're hooked up. Now what do? It's happened so fast. You've been fishing all day with nothing, and all of a sudden you've got a 3-foot long fish on your line. Strip set. I can't say that enough. You're fishing sinking lines. If you trout set and you instinctively lift that rod tip with an upward motion, you're just not going to have the power in the hook set to penetrate the fish's mouth. They got a really bony mouth. So pull on them and pull on them again, and maybe a third time, like hook them well. Load the rod. We talked about that already, and apply pressure the opposite way the fish is moving, trying to keep him on his toes. Don't let up, don't try to put him on the reel. Just pull hard, keep that rod tip low. Often my rod tip's in the water to keep them underwater, and you can strip it into your leader. There's no problem there. These hooks are big. They're not going to pull out if your leader's in your rod tip and a fish takes a run. It's just going to slip through your rod guides. It's all good. Biggest thing is having someone that's calm and cool on the net. I've had a lot of people mess up net jobs for me when I fish, and it's usually when they panic and they try to take them tail first. Any fish that senses a net coming at them from behind is going to take off. Keep in mind, fish can only swim forward. They can't swim backwards, at least not fast. So if you try to get them tail first, you're just going to lose. Keep them in the net, head in the water while you're getting ready to release them and take the photo. And have all your tools close at hand. So I have 2 sets of tools, one at the front, one at the back. Not only do I bonus if I lose a pair of pliers, I also don't have to go searching for them. And I always have a pair clipped in my pocket. So there's 3 sets of pliers in the boat, bolt cutters and jaw spreaders. Corner of the jaw, it's meaty. The fish isn't going to shake it. It's underneath the upper mandible. It's a good spot. Other spot, obviously, right in the tip of the jaw. Good direction when you're pulling. But I'm not going to lie. Over 60% of the fish you catch, that fly is going to be down their throat. So that's why we run barbless. Pike are suction feeders. They open that mouth, they create a void, and that fly shoots back. And because a fly is unweighted and soft, it's going to go. Unlike, let's say, a Rapala jerkbait, that fish sucks it in and then it hits the back of the mouth and it can't go any further. These flies are down. So you get very positive hookups with pikes, and you hook a lot of fish. Like, you don't miss too many, even when you make mistakes. What I talked about earlier, net in the water, a big basket. This net's in the water the whole time. That pike, he lifted it up slightly for the picture, but its head's underwater at all times. It can sit in there for as long as you want while you're getting ready to unhook it and take your photo. Big fish, you want to support them. Vertical holds used to be the thing of the past, and I still remember days when I was growing up of uncles and stuff holding pike by their eyeballs. That was the thing, like, it was crazy to think about it. But a lot of people are cautious of gill holding, and I get that with salmonids, different trout and salmon species. But with pike and muskie, you want to control the head, and I'm not holding them by their gill. I'm holding it by the gill cover. So I get people often telling me, when I put a photo up online saying, "Oh, your hand's in the gill." Well, anybody that's pike or muskie fish knows that you're nowhere near the actual gill, and controlling the head is very important. It's the business end. You don't want that spinning around and snapping at you. And there's no tail to really hold on to, like the rigid tail of a salmon. Like, you try to tail that fish and the tail collapses and it just takes off again. So that's your best way to hold them. With the hand under the belly to support it. Try not to hold them close to the pectoral fins. That's where the heart is. You don't want to compress that on any fish. So you want to make sure there's a nice bit of room there. And if they're really big, and you're not sure if you can handle them, get out of the boat, hold them over the water. If they take off and they flop, hey, fish health is priority. That's why if you follow me at all on social media, you'll see almost every steelhead photo I post is people are out of the boat holding a fish. I don't like holding them in the raft because if you drop them, they bounce off the floor. And we all know steelhead are hard to hold on to. So they hit the water, they hit the water. We got our photo or we didn't. And sometimes you get some funny fish flops. And then, we talked about it quickly, but barbless is key, and that's why we need long pliers. So that's how a lot of them come back hooked. Also why almost all my flies just have a single head hook, no trailer, with the exception of a couple that run the pockerini tails, because they often target the tail. But again, all barbless. In this sense, with this fish, the hook was down in the gill, so we cut it. We just donated the fly. I didn't donate the fly to the fish. I cut the hook itself and then pulled the hook out the way it originally wanted to continue to go through. So it was wrapped around the gill. We snipped the hook. We pulled the fly out. We pulled the remainder part of the hook out. The fish wasn't even actually punctured. It was wrapped around one of the gills. And the fish had no blood and it was easy to swim away. You kind of got to be okay with sometimes cutting your hooks and saying goodbye to your fly. With some of my musky flies, though, now we're utilizing things called dropper shanks, which utilize split rings and single hooks that I can replace. So you cut your hook off, you put a new hook on. Just because musky flies, if you've tied them, they take a lot of time. You're often an hour plus per fly, and you don't want to be throwing those away for on one fish that you catch on it. So, but yeah, that's me. That's spring pike. Overview of what I do and how I think if you read into that and took some notes, it should help stack the odds in your favor for the spring. I'm a really open individual. If you ever have questions, I can be reached at the following email or website, or social media as well. Smooth River Guiding on Instagram. I'm very active and usually respond way too fast. My wife hates that I respond usually within minutes. It sometimes drives me crazy too, but it's I like to respect people that take the time out of their day to message me. So, but that's me. I hope you enjoyed it.